the grinning man is reported to be human-like in appearance, though is commonly associated with UFO activity and is sometimes believed to be an alien. It is also believed possible that he is connected with the Men in Black. In his first sighting, he was described as being over 6 feet tall and wearing a reflective green suit with black belt. He had a dark complexion and small beady eyes set far apart. He was described not having any nose, ears, or hair. In his second known encounter, his suit was said to be blue instead of green, but still retained its reflective property. Along with that, he was described as looking perfectly natural with slick back hair, a coat with the top 2 buttons unbuttoned, and having pants lighter than the coat but still the same material. He was also described as being quite tan, though not dark, and looking like any normal human being. According to reports made by Woodrow Derenberger, Indrid Cold came from a planet named Lanolos in the Ganymedes galaxy, and that there were 2 other grinning men by the names of Demo Hassan and Carl Ardo. Indrid Cold was first seen on October 16, 1966, when 2 boys, Martin Mouse Monoff and James Jimmy Yachidas, in New Jersey, were walking on 4th Street when they saw a surreal figure standing near a fence. As they walked closer, the figure was a tall, bald man wearing a metal green suit who was staring right at them with a huge grin. The idiosyncratic man chased them until they got away from him. UFO sightings were also reported around the area at that time. Quote, Jimmy nudged me and said, "Who's that guy standing behind you?" I looked around and there he was, behind that fence, just standing there. He pivoted around and looked right at us. Then he grinned a big old grin. End quote. According to Nightmind, the boys only recalled the more frightening details of their encounter later on. They would recall that the man in the green suit was unusually tall and had unnatural facial features, such as the lack of ears and a nose. On November 2, 1966 in Parkersburg, West Virginia, around the same time as the Mothman came about, Woodrow Derenberger was driving his way home on Interstate 77 until he heard a crash. Then, an unidentifiable vehicle appeared to land in front of his truck. He described it as, quote, an old-fashioned kerosene lamp chimney, flaring at both ends, narrowing down to a small neck, and then enlarging in a great bulge in the center, end quote. The grinning man came out of the vehicle with a dark tan and walked up to Derenberger and telepathically said his name was Indrid Cold, and he meant no harm. Cold said he just wanted to know more about the human race, and he would visit Derenberger again. After the encounter, Derenberger stated that Cold revealed he was from a planet Lanolos in the galaxy of Ganymedes. During the same period in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, the Lilly family had been reporting that poltergeist activity was going on in their home, such as a diamond-shaped light. The Lilly's daughter, Linda, was sleeping one night and awoke to see a man standing over her. Quote, it was a man, a big man, very broad. I couldn't see his face very well, but I could see that he was grinning at me. He walked around the bed and stood right over me. I screamed again and hid under the covers. When I looked again, he was gone. End quote. It is commonly believed that Indrid Cold may be an alien entity and is supported by its close connection with UFO activity and the Derenberger sighting. It is also said by Derenberger that the grinning man is in fact a species of aliens with multiple grinning men, although this is unlikely unless the aliens are shapeshifters, because it would be almost impossible for a race to take the exact same evolutionary path as us. However, the third sighting by a Lilly family suggests instead that it may be the ghost or spirit of some kind and was connected with the poltergeist activity happening in the residence. It may be a prank that went too far, or a man with a mental illness. Others believe that it is a normal human man or a hoax based off of the popularity and the fear of the Mothman, who had been first sighted around the same time. In the famous Derenberger interview, Woodrow describes Indrid Cold. I was very frightened, and as far as I can understand, this was all mental. There were not spoken words from him. I knew what he was asking me, but yet he stood there and his mouth did not move. He had a smile on his face. He appeared very courteous and friendly. End quote. Indrid Cold and Mr. Derenberger's conversation lasted about 10 minutes. Cold told him, quote, we eat, we breathe, we sleep, we bleed even as you do, end quote. Before returning to his flying craft, he said, quote, "We will see you again in time," end quote. Derenberger later reported this event to the police. Woodrow's story gained traction in the media, gaining news coverage and attention after the Parkersburg police were convinced of his story. A representative of the Air Force even contacted him soon after his accounts were documented. On November 3, 1966, during this media storm, he went on live TV in Parkersburg, West Virginia, where he was interviewed by the state police, the Wood County Airport, the city police, and representatives from the Dayton, Ohio Air Force Base. After the interview aired, an older man claimed that he too saw a figure matching the description of Indrid Cold on Route 77, trying to flag him down, but he was afraid to stop. Derenberger's conversation with Cold could be corroborated. Other people claimed to see lights and, quote, "fluttering vehicles," end quote. At the same instant, on the road, there were several witnesses that reported seeing Woodrow Derenberger stopped on the highway talking to this man, and some even saw the flying craft parked on the road. Reports poured in of strange lights in the sky and beings, all at the same time, at the same place on Highway I-77 on that night of November 2nd, 1966. It was big news in the area for almost 3 weeks. The Parkersburg News chronicled Derenberger's story, and a number of forthcoming witnesses, many of whom asked to remain anonymous or have their names withheld. John Keel talked with Woodrow Derenberger and conducted his own interview and investigation. Gray Barker, a science fiction writer from Braxton County, West Virginia, also talked with Woodrow. Over the course of the month that followed, Derenberger claimed that he was visited by Indrid Cold many times, and that he even took him out on his spaceship to his planet. Indrid Cold would also appear at Woodrow's front door. His wife and children even knew that this Indrid Cold was paying him visits, and they even eventually came forward saying they too saw Indrid Cold and other strange beings. Woodrow's wife was terrified and stated that these beings were much like us, traveled in everyday cars, dressed in everyday clothes, but were not human in origin. There was even one time where Mr. Derenberger disappeared for 6 months and said he was with Indrid Cold. This is what members of his family actually believed. He would also receive mental messages from his long-distant friend. They would come suddenly and leave piercing migraine headaches. His residents would often receive strange, unknown phone calls. Sometimes they were threats to stop speaking about his experience. Other times, they were odd beeps and electronic hums. Sometimes it was just silence. The family changed their number to an unlisted one, but somehow the calls continued. His story gained such media attention that locals would flock to his house all hours of the day and night and wait in crowds in his driveway to catch a glimpse of his friend, Indrid Cold. Bogal Ridge is another location associated with the story. Derenberger claimed to go there to meet with Indrid Cold and go on rides into outer space. Some locals claim to actually have seen spaceships land there. On one occasion, 2 men armed with loaded rifles were hiding in the woods by Derenberger's property. They observed a black Volkswagen enter his front yard. A peculiar man dressed in all black suit with tan skin exited and talked with Woodrow before leaving. The hunters were disappointed. They waited even longer, wanting to see something truly terrifying, but maybe they already had. Woodrow hadn't heard of the men in black, but after his visit, he was extremely frightened by them. Derenberger eventually decided to seek medical attention and the opinion of a Parkersburg psychiatrist. He not only leaves with a clean bill of health and absolutely no evidence of chemical imbalance or disruption, but his very doctor endures a reaction soon after their meeting. He is contacted in December by a most peculiar man, his name, Indrid Cold. He doesn't reach out by phone, but telepathically. Woodrow Derenberger later related his stories to an author in 1971. They published a book titled Visitors from Llanellos, which told of Woodrow's visits from Indrid Cold. The book contained a foreword dated October 12, 1968, by John Keel. Here are the excerpts from John's foreword. Quote, "There are many who will scoff at this book and reject it entirely. Woodrow Derenberger will be called a liar, a psychopath, and many other unpleasant things. He has already suffered considerable ridicule and condemnation, even from those who believe in flying saucers, but do not wish to believe that someone is actually riding around in them. I cannot endorse his story, but I do feel I know the man well enough to give him the character reference. The important thing is that he seems to be telling the truth as he knows it. He sincerely believes that these things happen to him, and he is willing to expose himself to ridicule and condemnation in order to make himself heard." End quote. Quote, "I have talked to and contacted claimants who are doctors, lawyers, and newspapermen, police officers and pilots. Woody has a lot of company, sane, reputable people. Perhaps we are the ones who have been insane for ignoring them for so long. Strange, unbelievable things are now happening to people all over the world. By listening to the handful of courageous ones like Woodrow Derenberger, we may at last gain some real insight into what is really behind the UFO phenomenon. I'm not asking you to believe any of it, but I am asking you to listen to what he has to say. Incredible though it may seem, it is very possible that these very same things could happen to you tomorrow." End quote.